What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 428. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how are you, buddy?
Well, I'm sad that we won't be talking about Alpha, but I am happy that we're back.
That was a fun show.
It was. I, as we both said, it was maybe a little self-indulgent in some ways, but I think it also was really awesome. And we'll figure out where to go from there. We've got some plans maybe.
Yeah, because the main thing is one of our core kind of ideas or principles for our show is that when you, the listener, show up, that we're giving you some takeaways, something to leave with that's useful to you. And these type of shows tend to be a little bit low on that, though you can still learn a few things about Magic as a whole. But when you sit down for your draft at F&M, you're not like, well, did you know that in Alpha, it's like, well, that's not really getting anywhere.
The way I choose to look at it is that was the pilot, and if we do further episodes, they will likely not be in place of a normal show, I think. So
there you go. That's cool. Yeah. And obviously we hope that you as a listener trust us that when we do decide to break that convention, we do it with good reason. We just really want, that show was super fun. And man, I learned actually a lot from it too. I thought I knew quite a bit because I talked to Ryan about it a lot, but you guys had some tricks up your sleeves. It was fun.
Yeah, we did. But we're back on the limited format of rotation, which, as you and I have discussed, we're talking about the show, we're both still just drafting a lot, which, look, not to burst anyone's bubble, but that does not happen with every set. I think it is great when it does happen and it makes us much better at our jobs. But for some sets, it's like, I'll just front load a ton of practice for the PT. I'll come back home and I'll be like, I don't really want to join a triple Ixalan draft right now. Whereas the first thing I did when I came home from playing the Rivals Pro Tour was fire up 5 more Rivals drafts in the next 2 days. So I think that this format is deep, rich, and I'm going to enjoy talking about it today.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're going to be talking about is the archetype breakdown. We're going to go over all of the available archetypes in Rivals of Ixalan, and we're going to tell you the good stuff, the bad stuff, the underrated stuff, and what you need to know about each one in case you find yourself maybe in that archetype that you haven't drafted yet, or maybe you'll learn about a new one and try to draft it in one of your next few drafts. Before we get into the main topic, channelfireball.com. That is the place to go for everything you need Magic related on the internet. That's right. Anything you need at CFB, they're going to have it. They've got supplies, they've got deck boxes, limited resources, sleeves, and deck boxes even. And while you're there, of course, you can get singles, sealed product, and everything else that you need to play Magic. Of course, you can sell your cards back to them as well. This is one I like to mention on the show often because it's one that I think a lot of people don't really realize, which is that you can take those old cards that aren't doing anything and you can sell them back to Channel Fireball. They'll even give you a 30% bonus on a store trade-in, which is a big game. You can get another box, have another draft with your friends, and keep it rolling. So please do check out channelfireball.com. Patreon is the place to go if you want to support the show directly. And we've got a few things going on the Patreon here. First things first, got a little giveaway to do here, Luis. We've got I figured that the little pile of cards had grown big enough. I've got some kind of sweet stuff in here. There's a foil full art mountain. What do you think about that? That's pretty good, right?
It's all right. What about the alpha pack you opened last week?
Well, I put a beta forest in here.
Oh, that's really nice, actually.
Yeah, there. See, and there's an island from whatever it's called, stable. Anyway, a bunch of cards. I'm going to put those in a limited resources deck box, and I'll put a sticker and some sleeves and a divider in there as well for our winner. Now, the way that you can be in these is just by being a patron. Anybody who's on the Patreon is eligible for these giveaways. And the winner for this one is
Scott.
Devin Zoller. You're not eligible. Devin Zoller from Portland. Thank you, Devin. I'll get these in the mail. It should be down to you pretty quickly as well because, well, you live so close to me. Thanks for your support of the show, and I'll be doing more giveaways coming up shortly as well, so stay tuned for those. One other thing you get, of course, is the Patreon question of the week. This one comes from Ed, who says, after vintage cubing a while, I still can't get my head around which is a better first play when in a big green ramp deck. A generic mana dork like Elvish Mystic or Jiraga Tree Speaker. I often have to choose and play either one without any good reason. Cheers and love the show, Ed. Ed, it's Jiraga Tree Speaker.
Yep.
The card's broken.
That's the answer to the question. Anything else?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I know it sounds simple because one makes 2 mana and one makes 1 mana, but that's all the difference in the world and well worth the risk that you accrue by having to put that level counter on it.
To be a little bit more in detail is that you don't get 3 mana on turn 2 and you play Tree Speaker. It doesn't ramp you until turn 3, but it double ramps you on turn 3. And on turn 2, you get your mana back. So turn 1 Tree Speaker, turn 2 put a counter. You can tap it to play any 1 or 2 mana spell. Then next turn you have 5 to 6 mana depending on what else you played. So yeah, you should just leave a Tree Speaker. It's good practice.
Yeah. All right, let's do Rivals Crack Pack. I have really been loving this format, Luis. I'm all over the map now, by the way. All right, first card out. Sun Sentinel, 1 and a white for a 2/2 with Vigilance.
In my ideal world, this never makes my deck.
Yeah, I agree.
There's one exception. There's one time when I like this card in my deck.
Tell me.
Path of Metal. If you have Path of Metal, then Sun Sentinel is playable. Path of Metal is not a joke, by the way.
It's kind of a joke, though.
But it's really not.
It might be a good... I've had somebody transform it on me and kill me with it, so I get what you're saying, but that card is just ridiculous.
Oh, it's an absurd card, but it is
a shoe-in for card I always have to read at the Sunset Show.
Yeah,
I know it, by the way. I can read you that whole card without looking at it.
That question's well hard for me to answer because I just know all the cards.
Sure. How about you read me what you think that card does, and I'll tell you if you got it wrong.
Path of Metal?
Yeah.
Okay. It's
you're going to miss something.
It's red-white for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each creature without first strike, vigilance, haste, or double strike.
Okay.
When you attack with 2 creatures that have first strike, haste, double strike, or vigilance, transform Path of Metal. And it turns into... I don't know the names. I don't know the names.
Yeah, the names, whatever.
Sun Temple or whatever, Metzkali Sun Temple or something. It taps for a mana of any color.
Yeah.
You can pay a red and 1 and tap it and deal 2 damage to your opponent. Or you can pay 2 a white and tap it and destroy a random attacking creature.
That is wrong on many levels. They're all nitpicks, but it's true. So it's to each opponent for starters.
Oh,
and I got more. Just hang in there. And the what's it called? The the flip part, the white part, is choose a creature at random that attacked this turn, destroy that creature, which is super weird because it means you can do it later. And it's a legendary enchantment. So you were wrong on multiple levels. Wow. Really disappointed in you for that one. So you want Sun Sentinel in your Path of Metal deck, even though you don't really know what it does. Is that accurate?
All right, let's keep going.
All right, Fanatical Firebrand. Hey, Path of Metal deck.
Yeah, I play this card too. It's red for a 1/1 with haste, and you can tap and sack it to deal 1 to target creature or player. It's also a pirate. I like this card. I would not first pick it, but I tend to play 1 in my main deck, and I'll frequently side in a second. It's just good if they have 1 toughness creatures. It's good if you have ways to pump it. It's just a little good way to spend a mana. It's worth a mana most of the time.
It is it definitely holds its own. It makes combat a little awkward for your opponent. Swaggering Corsair, 2 and a red 2/2 pirate with raid. It gets a +1/+1 counter. Playable but mediocre.
Yeah, playable, fine card. Nothing special.
Yeah. Oh no, poor Canal Monitor. Next is Gilt Grove Stalker. That's the 1 and a green 2/1 merfolk that can't be blocked with creatures with power 2 or less.
It's the front runner, but it's not a card I'm particularly happy about. I mean,
agreed. It's
a fine card, and green-red does actually want to curve out. And if you end up in merfolk, it's good as well. So it's good in 2 different decks, which I like. I think it's pretty bad in black-green and green-white. So that makes me not super excited about it, but it is certainly playable. And I've taken a lot of damage from this card when I'm hiding behind Sailor of Means and Gleaming Barrier.
I agree. Grasping Scoundrel, the sick...
Oh, the Graspel?
The sick vampire, yeah. What, the black one, when it attacks, it gets +1/+, so it's a pirate.
Yeah. This is forever going to be the Graspel to me. And it is not a card I want to play, and I'm excited to play against it because this does get owned by Gleaming Barrier and Sailor Means.
It does indeed. Overgrown Armasaur, 3GG, 4/4 with Enrage, you get a Sapperling.
It's like the height of mediocrity, so it is just a card you'll play in your dinosaur decks if you have no other good 5-drops like Stampeding Horncrest.
There you go, your favorite. Tillinolly's Crown, 1 and a red aura that enchants a creature, does 1 damage to that creature, and the creature gets +3/+0 and trample.
This card's underrated, I believe.
I think so too.
This is a Mondo combo card, and when it pays off, it's really good. Plus, it just kills 1 toughness creatures. Though, multiple times I've seen it used to try to kill a 1 toughness creature, be met with a pump spell, and that is bad for you.
Oh, yeah. You want to make sure that the way is clear before you try to slap that thing on a Gilt Grove Stalker from your opponent. This card's good. Squire's Devotion, 2 and a white, aura. Creature gets +1/+1 and lifelink, and you get a 1/1 lifelink vampire.
Oh, yeah. This is not only easily the best card in this pack, I have this card moving up in my pick order dramatically.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really good, too. Also, the type of decks that I've been drafting I have been much more Ascend focused, and cards like Squire's Devotion really shine in those type of decks.
Yeah, it gives you 2 permanents and also catches you up when you're behind, which those decks tend to get.
Yes, and they can definitely get behind. Deadeye Righauler. It's my boy. 3 and a blue for a 3/2 pirate, and it has raid, return target creature to its owner's hand.
Yeah, this card is fine. It is
fine.
Quite good in aggressive red-blue, playable in blue-white flyers and blue-black with enough creatures, and also playable in Merfolk. It's playable across all the decks, only really good in like the really aggressive versions, but the fact that I think it's playable even in the control decks, like, look, if you play a Sailor of Means or a Siren Lookout on turn 3 and then attack with it and play this on turn 4, it's good even if you're not beating your opponent down. You're not paying a whole lot for this ability. So
no.
I like the card. I think it's worse than Squire's Devotion, though.
I agree. Up you go, you soggy rat. All right, uncommons. Reckless Rage. This one's really good. Red, instant. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, this is the front runner now. This is red, instant, deal 2 to a creature you control and 4 to a creature you don't. So you can do a lot of really cool tricks with this. You know, the level 1 is just cast this on a 3 toughness creature, but that works out just fine. Mm-hmm. It's a 1-mana removal spell. You can also combine it with enrage cards. You can also do things like target my Fanatical Firebrand, then sack it in response, and it'll still resolve on their creature. So, or use it in response to them trying to cast a removal spell on your creature. It's just a really good card. So I like it. I like it overall, the comments here.
I do too. Yeah, I think the card's excellent. Aquatic Incursion. This one hasn't really come around. It's 3 and a blue enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you get 2 1/1 blue merfolk with hexproof, and you can pay 3 and a blue to give a merfolk unblockable until end of turn.
This card is
bad, right?
Not great, but it's got a couple niche uses. One is that with the right merfolk lords, it is pretty powerful. Okay. You know, if you have Deeproot Champion or Merfolk Mistbinder or Kumena, any of those, this does the thing. Also, I have lost to this card, and I've sideboarded it in. Against control decks, this card can really just put a beating on them because you get multiple creatures they can't remove, and then if you have any auras, you can just hit them with unblockable 3-power creatures, or if you just play another merfolk, like you have a Swift Guardian out or whatever, the 3/3 flash, you just have that card, and then all of a sudden you play this, then you just have a 3/3 unblockable. So it's slow, but it is very good if the board is not going anywhere.
Do you main deck it? Because I haven't been main decking Aquatic Incursion. I just leave it in the board, and then maybe I keep telling myself if somebody's playing the Sailor Means, you know, the stuff that it just creates a wall that I'll play it, but I just never end up doing it.
It's not a card I would main deck unless I had a lot of Merfolk synergies, but I like it as a sideboard card. I've also played it in blue-white if I have a ton of Ascend payoffs, like 5 or 6 Ascend payoffs.
Mm-hmm. Okay, because that is three permanents. Ooh, yeah. We have a winner for me. Golden Demise is next. 1 black sorcery. Ascend. All creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. If you got City's Blessing, your opponent's creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. Slam it!
It's funny because you would think that an Infest, right, that was the original version of this effect, would be less good in a slightly slower format, but it turns out this Infest is still just great because there's just even the slow decks have a lot of creatures that die to it, and one of the weaknesses of cards like this is that if you're an aggressive or small creature deck that's not good, all of a sudden this card just wipes your opponent's board and doesn't touch yours. So I think that Golden Demise isn't as good as the Chupacabra, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, I have them right neck and neck, and I don't think that they're in the same print run, so you won't have to make that decision really ever.
Yeah, and I think you're going to take the Chupacabra, but I do think that there are some decks where you'd want a Golden Demise over a Chupacabra. It's just hard to know that you're going to end up there. So Golden Demise is fantastic. I'm almost assuredly taking this card, barring some kind of bomb rare.
All right, well, our rare is not a bomb. It's called Silent Gravestone. Do you know what this does?
Yes.
I could not have told you.
It's a 1-mana artifact. It's a rare. It says cards in graveyard can't be the target of spells or abilities. Mm-hmm. And you can pay 4, tap, and sack it to exile all cards in all graveyards and draw a card. Is that right?
No, you're wrong again.
What does it do?
You exile it. 4 tap, exile it.
It's going to be that kind of show, huh?
Gotcha again, buddy. Yeah. We're not taking it. I will be putting it in the giveaway pile for some unfortunate listener to get down the road, hopefully with some other good stuff. Golden Demise, right?
Oh, yeah. It's Golden Demise, and you assume the next person's taking Reckless Rage, and then after that it gets dicey as to what goes next, like Squire's Devotion or Deadeye Rig Hauler. But either way, you're well set up. There's not even an Impaler Movement of Craven to throw any sort of problems your way.
First picking Golden Demise with just clean is so nice. Okay, let's get into the breakdown of the archetypes. We've actually got 11 of them to go through, so quite a few to cover here today. But we wanted to make sure that we touched on all of the ones that we've been playing. And even a few that honestly I haven't been playing. So let's start off. I wanted to actually start off with the one that I've been enjoying the most and kind of the goal for me when I sit down, if you will. Like I don't, I try to stay open, but this is kind of taking that to the extreme. This is the 3 to 5 color nonsense deck, as we would call it, or the Sailor of Means deck, if you will. This is kind of a blue-based controlling deck that usually plays 3 to 5 colors and often has an Ascend sub-theme. You'll find yourself working towards these Ascend payoffs pretty often. And it tends to be blue-black or blue-white at the core, but it has the ability to go all 5 colors. And this deck is so fun to play, Luis. I love it.
There was a couple weeks, like leading up to the PT and even in the PT, where I felt like this deck was underdrafted. Like the word was out. People didn't know about it. Kenji's streaming and Zakamaing people in his blue decks, and Kenji Sumura is posting pictures on Twitter where he has 6 Sailor of Means in his deck. Yeah. But still people weren't taking it seriously, because I know when I talked to my team they weren't, and a lot of people at the PT just didn't really like think that this was as good as it is. But I think it is really good. You're not seeing 7th pick Secrets of the Golden City anymore. You're not wheeling Sun-Crested Pterodons. You used to do those things.
Right. And let's talk about some of those cards. Let's talk about some of those cards. Sailor Means is the one that we mentioned first because it serves 3 important roles, which is why it is such a high pick and such an important card. It gives you 2 permanents towards Ascend. It lets you splash thanks to Treasure, and it's a good blocker as a 1/4 on the ground. It doesn't have the tribal stuff, but three important roles in a deck is more than you'll get out of almost any card. You mentioned Secrets of the Golden City. That's a great way to reload in the late part of the game or in a pinch to Divination early on to, make sure you hit your land drops and stuff. Dust Charger, surprisingly good. Payoff card, right? Just, okay, I hit Ascend and start crashing in there with a 5/5. It actually works out pretty well. I found Recover to be a card that I'm interested in this deck quite often because you are kind of playing for that long game, so your creatures are going to get traded off or killed. If you have any bombs, of course, it goes up in value. If you have a Chupacabra, it goes way up. Snubhorn Sentry. I play this guy now, Luis.
Oh, yes. Snubhorn Sentry is quite playable in this deck. It's a 1-drop that can block a lot of the 2s, and then all of a sudden becomes a 3/3 on turn 5 through 7.
Mm-hmm. Which sounds bad. Right? Like that is not exciting. We both
thought this card was going to be horrendous, and it ended up being playable. It's not great. Look, you're not second picking it, but it is definitely a card you can put in your deck, and I've played a lot of them.
Yeah, and then the last one's actually just good, and that's the chicken, Sun-Crested Pterodon.
Yeah. 5 mana, 2/5 flyer, vigilance if you control another dinosaur, but that part isn't even that important. And this card has moved. This is one of the biggest movers where, it used to be filler, right, to a lot of people, and you would see them 10th pick.
Total filler, yeah.
But now after the format's gotten drafted more and people are talking about it more, like you see for most people who are like posting pick orders and stuff like that, this isn't the top couple for white commons. It just looks bad for some reason. And previous versions of 5 mana 2/5s just haven't been good. Like Sky Ruin Drake and Zendikar was a 5 mana 2/5 flyer and was just bad. But Sun-Crested Pterodon is great. It just stops everything, and it just eventually kills your opponent. So I like this card a lot. The combination of Sun-Crested Pterodon, Luminous Bond, Squire's Devotion, Dusk Martyr, Snubhorn Sentry, and Divine Verdict mean that I end up white a lot because white has a lot of mid-range playables for this deck that you can get later to pick up and help you defend yourself to go along with your blue cards.
Yeah, and that is one thing that you see happening a lot is that you kind of will go, like if you opened up a Golden Demise, you're incentivized to be heavier into black, and then the blue tends to complement it. But the white stuff is easily splashable, and that's something that pops up all the time. Luminous Bonds and Divine Verdict are both easy one-color splashes, which of course on the flip side you don't have with Impale. So you do see that quite often, that you're going to be kind of spreading your picks between blue, white, and then black on some level, depending on if you get a Chupacabra, an Impale, or a Golden Demise.
Yeah, black's tricky for this deck because all the cards you want besides Dust Charger are like double black.
Exactly.
Like you said, like Impale, Chupacabra, Golden Demise, the cards that pull you into it. Mm-hmm. But if black is open, then yeah, it is great for this. Like Dusk Legion Zealot is great. Dusk Charger is great. I do want like almost exactly one Recover in all my decks. Mm-hmm. I don't usually want a main deck 2, but I do like having that Recover. And
the deck's fun, right? Yeah. It's just really fun to play. Like that part I don't know, it stood out to me.
Well, I think it's good. And I think that besides the like, we want to just play all the cards, fun part of it, well, part of the actual advantage is there's a lot of bombs in this format, and being capable of taking, the Zatalpa you open in pack 2 or the Tetsamok or whatever you end up seeing and putting in your deck is really strong.
You mentioned Zakama. That wasn't even a joke. Like I ran one of those 2 days ago.
One of the first versions of this deck that I drafted played Zakama. It was a blue-white deck with 4 Sailor Means and like 2 Prosperous Pirates. And
oh yeah,
Zakama was awesome in the deck because you play it and you win the game.
Yeah.
And I think that being able to take and use all of these powerful cards, of which there are many, is really good, especially if you can kind of limit yourself after pack 1 to being mostly blue. Like if blue is open and you're just like, I've got a Water Knot, 2 Sailor of Means, Secrets of the Golden City, and a Gleaming Barrier, and then like 1 or 2 off-color cards. Then if you open a Tetsamok, you can just ditch whatever non-black cards you have and just be blue-black. And that is a huge edge for this deck. Whereas like if you're kind of deep into like red-green dinos and you open Tetsamok, like you got some tough choices to make.
Right. And you're probably going to have to pass it or you
probably take it, but you end up losing a lot more than you would if you were in this Treasure Blue deck.
Yeah. I have absolutely loved playing this deck. It's super fun. As far as the card type breakdowns go, I've been playing 17 or 18 lands, usually 17. Somewhere between 12 to 14 creatures or so. It's not a particularly creature-heavy deck, but it does run a fair bit of them. I'm not putting a big emphasis on combat tricks for a deck like this. And, of course, I'll take basically all the removal I can get, which is kind of true of all decks, right? Like, there's really not a deck that won't. But this one actually gets to play a wider swath of removal because of the different colors you have access to.
And it is worth noting that it doesn't need all removal. Its creatures are kind of like removal for it. Like part of the strength in the core conceit of this deck is that you play Gleaming Barrier, Sailor of Means, Suncrested Pterodon, and they shut down. Like if let's say you have a Sailor into a Pterodon, right? Mm-hmm. That can sometimes shut down 4 of your opponent's creatures.
Definitely.
And that is card advantage. We've talked about that in various other shows where that's the kind of implied card advantage that you get of having good defensive creatures.
Yeah. Some of the cards that you should consider, maybe that you need to value a little bit higher, a little underrated cards or a little bit like bump them up. The Snubhorn Sentry for sure, the Suncrested Pterodon that we talked about. I like Secrets of the Golden City a lot in this deck. I play it pretty freely. I'll put 2 of them in the deck without even thinking.
Yeah, those cards are all, I think, cards you end up playing. I do think that Dusk Martyr and Snubhorn Sentry and Gleaming Barrier are all pretty interchangeable. It's just
Gleaming Barrier is a good one I didn't get for that.
Sea Legs is another card I like to have 1 copy of a lot of the time.
Yeah. So where are you at on that?
Sea Legs is a card I like to have 1 copy of a lot of the time.
Well, why do you like it? Do you think it's the blue, the blue Swords to Plowshares again, or
like it is unfortunate that it misses the aggressive pirates because that is a lot of the aggro decks you play against, but against vampires and merfolk, it can just negate like an Exultant Sky Marcher or a Guildgrove Stalker without having to spend much mana, and it sticks around for Ascend. So plus the natural combo of play turn 3 Sailor, they attack into it, use a combat trick, use the treasure to Sea Legs your Sailor. Like, how do they come back from that?
So clean, yeah. Yeah, but you should bump that one up a little higher. You would play one of them happily, or would you? I
usually would play 1 to 2 depending on my other options. You want to vary your defensive options because you don't know how they're going to line up against your opponent's stuff. But I like having 1 in the main and like 1 or 2 in the board, and then board them in when they're good.
Yeah, and don't forget you can of course save your own creatures too from like burn spells or combat tricks and stuff by using Sea Legs on those. On your Sailor Means and stuff. All right, so that's it for that deck. That is my favorite one. That is the one that is kind of my go-to deck. I will draft that one if left unimpeded every single time. Next one is a sort of a cousin of that deck. It's the blue-white Flyers / Ascend deck, which is basically, it has a lot of the similar core that you see from the other deck. It just doesn't reach out quite as far into the other colors. A lot of time, I think you'll start to draft this deck and end up in the other one just because the stuff, you end up with enough Sailor Beans or Treasure Makers, and all of a sudden you're like, well, I guess I'll just do 3 or 4 colors. But if you don't, there is a deck here as well, that kind of has this like Ascend plus good flyers and good blockers down on the ground thing going on. The removal ranges from quite good to mediocre, and you kind of have to play all of it. Some of the key commons. Now, normally I don't like to put the premium common removal spells on this type of list because we kind of assume that you understand that, like, if you're in red, Bombard is going to be an important card for your deck regardless of what the rest of your deck is trying to do. But here I did put Luminous Bonds and Waterknot on because they can be really important for the Ascend half of this deck. Removal spells that add a permanent to the battlefield rather than just going to your graveyard actually add up quite quickly and can get you in a really good position. Sun-Crested Pterodon's also good here, but you also want the cheaper stuff like the Kitesail Corsair. That's a good card that can be responsible for a lot of damage. The Exultant Sky Marcher, as well. These cheap flyers, and this is a time proven strategy that still works fine in this format.
So this deck, the two main times it's different from the Sailor Means deck is, first of all, it doesn't tend to splash very often.
Right.
Second is you get a slightly more aggressive bet. You actually want Kitesail Corsair in your deck, or you open something like Curious Obsession, which is really good on the different kinds of flyers that you could put in your deck. And you almost can be a blue-white auras deck, because sometimes you just have a deck that has like a Curious Obsession and 2 Squire's Devotion, and then you're just slamming Soul of the Currents and any other
trying to sell that.
So what? And any other flyer that you can get your hands on. The Slippery Scoundrel is also really good. The uncommon 2/2 hexproof unblockable, and
yes,
you can almost even be a control deck that just plays auras as a finisher. And I have had a good amount of success if I pick up like 2 or 3 hexproof dudes and 2 or 3 auras, and then just trying to survive until you can combine those two and just win the game on the spot.
Yeah, Squire's Devotion on anything with high toughness or hexproof
Mark of the
is
Vampire.
great.
That is a splashable card these days.
It is, and what you'll often see with the Slippery Scoundrel is that people will try to set it up such that they either already have Ascend or the enchantment gives them Ascend, and boom, it's almost impossible to beat that. At that point, another one that comes up here somewhat often, though more so in the blue-black version with actual Mark of the Vampire, Squire's Devotion on the guy you mentioned, the Soul of the Rapids, and that is a very, very difficult thing to beat if you have any way to get any flying blockers out of the way. This one I have been playing 17 lands in as well. 13 to 16 creatures. You want to try to narrow it down to evasive creatures, mainly flyers, but you mentioned a couple of other exceptions there, or just good blockers down on the ground. I will play card draw spells in this archetype, and then of course all the removal you can get with a priority on the enchantment based removal. Some of the cards that you want to go ahead.
I was going to say, basically, this deck is the same as the Sailor of Means deck in terms of what it's going for. And it just means that sometimes instead of 3 off-color cards and a couple of treasure cards, you'll have 2 Kitesail Corsairs or Resplendent Griffin, and just end up with a slightly more aggressive bent.
Yeah, and so the cards that you value higher are similar as well. Spirewiner's one that you can certainly play. It's not super exciting, but it does get the job done. Again, Secrets of the Golden City, Snubhorn Sentry. And then another one that I have been playing in here a little bit more than I thought I would is Legion Conquistador, which is a card that I've just been playing a lot more of than I did in the previous format in general. But this actually does create a bunch of problems on the ground for your opponent, and it's a source of card advantage, so I like that. And then you mentioned the Slippery Scoundrel.
Yeah, I like the Legion Conquistador. I think that card is quite strong.
I do too. I just think it's a good card now. This blue-white deck's pretty sweet, but like I said, oftentimes you'll find yourself just veering over into other colors because it's so easy to do. So nothing wrong with that. Next one is Blue-Red Evasion Pirates. And this one is our first really aggressive deck. here. It's a quick deck. It has lots of evasion, flying, and unblockable mainly, and it's capable of punishing slow decks or decks that are light on removal with these cheap threats that can get in for a lot of damage before they kind of get their feet under them. They can use evasion plus pirate synergies to pile on a lot of damage at once as well. Things like, getting in for a hit and using Buccaneer's Bravado to kill your opponent. I have done and also have had done to me, people playing Buccaneer's Bravado as well as Tillinolly's Crown. And just to one-shot me, just boom, take 8, take 10.
Tillinolly's Crown on like a Stormfleet Swashbuckler, the 2/2 Ascend double strike, is just such a beating.
Yes.
And there are a couple ways to assemble, things like that.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about the deck is that what it tends to do is bring out a bunch of cheap creatures that can get in for damage, but that can't always win the game on their own. So they'll get you lowish, 8 life or so. And then they kind of wait for the shields to go down enough to fire off one of these combos, one of these 2-card combos, or just get in with, just suicide a bunch of creatures in, but then use Buccaneer's Bravado to kill you, that kind of thing. Blue-red tends to do this, but this one does it as well, which is it almost feels like a combo deck sometimes.
Yeah, so it's not a curve-out deck in the sense that like Black-Red Pirates is. Mm-hmm. Even though it has some similarities, sure, it does want to play Kitesail Corsair into Swaggern and Corsair or whatever. But this deck does, first of all, disrupt the opponent with the Crashing Tide, Waterknot, Deadeye Righthauler a little bit more. And it also does the last 8 points of damage with, Buccaneer's Bravado a little bit more often as well.
That's right. Kitesail Corsair and Goblin Trailblazer are the 2 premier commons for this deck outside of removal. But those guys are responsible for huge amounts of damage if cast on turn 2 and backed up by any reasonable curve out. Cards like Deadeye Righthauler really shine in this deck. This is kind of its natural home. This is where you can go turn 2 Goblin Trailblazer, attack with it. Your opponent plays a creature. You get to attack with it again. They play another creature, and then you can start to combine bounce spells to keep damage flowing, or cards like Righthauler to make sure that they don't get enough blockers down to actually start blocking. And then now all of a sudden you start getting in range of Buccaneer's Bravado and that kind of thing.
I will say that I think that this deck, when it's good, it looks like an insanely oppressive deck. Like, it just looks absurd, right?
Yes.
They curve out, they play multiple bounce spells, and then they just 10 you in the end.
Yeah, and you're just sitting there with 5 cards in your hand, like, what happened?
But it is a little less consistent, and honestly, this is one of the decks that I don't think wins very much. Mm-hmm. I think that I do not like to be in this deck. I think sometimes it's right to be in this deck because Curious Obsession is really good in an aggressive deck. And like you said, the pair of 2-drops, the Corsair and Trailblazer, are both really good. And then Bombard and Waterknot are both really good. So it's got Premier 2-drops and Premier Removal at common. But this is a deck that just kind of underperforms, at least in my team's experience. And
yeah. There's some major issues, right? Like Golden Demise completely wrecks this deck, for example.
Shake the Foundations can often cause you problems. It also, when it draws a hand of like Deadeye Righthauler, Buccaneer's Bravado, Crashing Tide, it could just be like, well, I don't do anything. Yep. Or you play that hand plus a Trailblazer, you're like, yeah, I'm doing it. And then they go Moment of Craving or Trailblazer, then your turn 3 play is bounce something.
Yep.
Your turn 4 play is an unkicked Deadeye Righthauler.
Yes, and you're super far behind, yeah.
Whereas both those cards, if you look at like a different aggro deck where they could just play like a Fathom Fleet Border on turn 3 and then just any other creature on turn 4, won't feel quite as bad.
Right. And that deck won't win certain games that this one will, but beyond that, it's a much more solid game plan. Another thing this deck doesn't do well is play defense. The cards that you just named, behind, it's just bad. Yeah.
None of its creatures block, and bounce spells are horrible when you're behind, and pump spells are horrible when you're behind.
So it really does have it's a very finicky deck. And like you said, when it does win though, it can feel stupid. I usually play 16 lands in these decks. I'm pretty creature heavy, 14 to 16 creatures. Of course, the cheaper evasive threats are at a premium. Again, your Kitesail Corsairs and your Goblin Trailblazers are kind of your premium commons for it. I will play 2 to 3 combat tricks in decks like this, specifically Buccaneer's Bravado, but I mentioned Tillinolly's Crown. There's a few others that you can run. And then the rest is just as much removal and bounce spells as you can get. The bounce spells really are at home here. This is where you can turn a bounce spell into 5 or 6 damage and put yourself one step away from winning the game rather than just simply setting your opponent back. So that's a big one. Buccaneer's Bravado is a card you should be looking at and valuing higher for this archetype. I like Mutiny. I find that when you have evasive threats, being able to kill a small flyer so that your Kitesail Corsair can get in is good, and being able to kill a creature, like a creature down on the ground of almost any size is good because you'll often have multiple menace creatures, and just getting a blocker out of the way means that they sometimes just can't block at all. So I like that. One card that I think that goes in this deck pretty well actually is Frilled Death Spitter, even though it doesn't really look like it would go in. Look, it's an aggressive 3-drop that is guaranteed to get damage in effectively. And that is the kind of thing, because again, these decks can often play like a kind of a combo-ish type deck where you're just piling on just the right amount of damage, and Frilled Death Spitter can be a problem for your opponent there. And then you mentioned Curious Obsession. Now this card's just kind of generally good. I've run it in even some of my more controlling decks, just looking for a good late game.
It's just a combo card with any evasive creature.
Yeah. And here it just shines. You know, these are the ones. Stormfleet Sprinter as well, by the way, is a absolute headliner. And this, by the way, I wanted to mention this to you as well, Luis, is kind of interesting to me because, you know, we've took the advice from Ryan a while back and started doing the set reviews where we looked at the gold uncommons first, just because sometimes they're kind of signposts for what the archetype's doing. And this is a really good example of one that's doing exactly that.
That does sum this deck up completely.
Yeah. And same with the blue-white guy too. That one does too. Anyway, so yeah, there's that deck. I agree with your assessment though, Luis. It is an inconsistent deck, and I don't know that you need to be. When I think of transactions like that, I think, okay, I'm willing to play a less consistent deck if I can just win every time it does the thing that it's trying to do. That is not necessarily the case. The card that stood out to me from your example was Moment of Craving. That card is absolute beating against this deck because the life gain is super relevant and they get to kill a real threat with it. And if you can't beat, you know, a card that people are taking in the first through third pick in a commonly played color, that's not great. Like you look at some of the other archetypes here and they don't have a problem that big. So keep that in mind. But, you know, if you get enough of the gold cards, it really is a sweet deck that can get the job done. What about Merfolk? Is it the same? Is it different?
Oh, Merfolk's way worse than it used to be. We covered this in our show 2 weeks ago, that basically the density and quality of Merfolk has gone down. And as a result, Merfolk as a deck is a decent amount worse. Mm-hmm. But when it's open, it's still really good. So what you're trying to do here is basically combine all the Merfolk payoffs with a bunch of Merfolk in an aggressive shell. Because that is just kind of how this deck tends to work.
Yeah, and it's how it has to work when it works. It's just hard to make it do it.
And the good thing is there are a lot of Merfolk payoffs, right? There's multiple rare lords. There's a Mythic Lord in Kumena. There's Seafloor Oracle and Deep-Root Elite at rare. And there's Merfolk Mistbinder at uncommon. So that already is 4 cards that really reward you for having a lot of Merfolk. And then it gets a little worse at the common level, which is part of the reason the deck isn't as good. Like for common Merfolk, it's got Mistcloak Herald, the one unblockable, Goatgrove Stalker, the 2-1 that's hard to block, and then Jungleborn Pioneer and Jade Artisan. So it's got 4 like pretty high quality Merfolk, but it falls off pretty quickly after that.
Yeah, and these aren't that exciting, right?
Yes, and there are times when these cards are just not all that great. Mm-hmm. So I think that the deck can be good. The way to get into it is if you just start in the first couple picks with one of the Merfolk payoff cards, which first of all, I won't do all that often. Like I'm taking Bombard over Merfolk Mistbinder because I think that the odds that the Merfolk deck comes together are low enough that I'd rather just have the reliable good card. But imagine if you had like 2 blue cards and then you saw a third pick Merfolk Mistbinder or a third pick Deep-Root Elite. Now we're talking, and now I am interested in being Merfolk. And all you're trying to do after that, just take all the Merfolk you can get. You know, it's fine to play a couple bounce spells like Crashing Tide is good. It even has the Merfolk clause, which doesn't come up all that often. Mm-hmm. And you do get some good payoffs in Ixalan, though Ixalan's a big set, so you're not going to see a lot of One with the Winds or Jade Guardians. But yeah, if you do see them, they end up being pretty good in your deck as well.
Yeah. The Ixalan pack is pretty important, right? I mean, when you get to that point, you know, you're starting to get to these really high payoffs at the common level, like, River Herald's Boon. And that's the type of card that can take a deck that looks pretty mediocre and all of a sudden it's quite good. But you're kind of leaning on that pack really hard if you don't pick up those high-powered uncommons and rares that you mentioned. So keep that in mind. Very risky deck to draft too. I just find that, you know, when I'm in it, I'm just like, okay, hang on. It kind of feels like drafting Ixalan again. Like I'm just at the mercy of the packs, you know?
When you have like second pick a Merfolk Mistbinder and you're just like, well, I hope just 2 Jungleborn Pioneers and a Mistcloak Herald just, you know, go my way in the next 5 picks. But if they don't, you're just like looking at your overgrown Armasaurs and kind of Corsairs, and you're like, these cards just don't do much for me. So that's one of the reasons I don't like this deck, is that I feel like it is less consistent than I would like, though the payoffs are there when you actually get there.
Yeah, it's just hard to predict that. As far as the card types go, I usually end up running 16 lands in this deck. Heavy creatures, 15 to 18, is common because, well, they tend to help each other out. I'll run 2 to 3 combat tricks or more if they're the premium stuff. If I can get my hands on River Herald Spoon, there's no number that I wouldn't run of those effectively, especially with only one pack left. And then the removal spells, you do what you got to do. The problem, of course, also comes in that even cards like Hunt the Weak don't really shine in a deck like this. You often end up with a bunch of small creatures rather than one large one.
Yeah.
And that can make it worse. Jadecraft Artisan has been pretty good. That's a card that I, was like, it's fine. And it's like, okay, no, actually every time they play it, I'm like, okay, that's a lot of damage.
Better than fine.
Yeah, I agree. Crashing Tide is a card that you want to value higher for this archetype, as it's usually going to be an instant speed spell in your deck. And in that case, it's really quite good. Mistcloaked Herald on its own, I'm not a huge fan, but in conjunction with almost anything, it's fine. You should certainly play it. The killer combos with Curious Obsession, but if you're just putting +1/+1 counters on it, the clock ends up being very quick, and you should run your Mistcloaked Heralds. Card I've really been down on, Jade Bearer. I wanted to get your thoughts on that one, Luis.
In the heavy Merfolk deck, it's playable. Outside of it, it is atrocious. But if you're trying to trigger deep root elites and have Merfolk Mistbinder, the card does some pretty good work.
Yeah, it does. Okay, so that's that one. I think the big picture on it, though, it goes back to what you mentioned a minute ago, which is just that there's really not that much to go around, and you're taking a lot of risk if you decide to draft it. So be careful. This next one's kind of sweet. Green-red dinosaurs. I also just called it /aggro because it doesn't necessarily have to be a dinosaurs deck anymore. This is big dinosaurs, well-costed creatures get some enraged triggers and they beat down. You also get some fight cards, but additionally, you can just draft like a non-dinosaurs centric version of this deck that actually can beat down pretty well too.
I like this deck a lot. This is one of our team's favorite decks overall, just going into the Pro Tour, because it combines good mid-game and good early game with just overall powerful cards. It's really hard to get cut off here. And specifically, Stampeding Horncrest is still undervalued. This is the 4/4 haste if you control a dino for 5. You just get this card with 3 cards left in the pack over and over and over again.
That's because it's bad.
It is not bad. This card,
I think that card's just bad. It's just like super mediocre. Like I think 4 cards left in the pack is where it should go.
This card is quite good. I think it's one of the payoffs for being in this deck. Because when you curve out and you play that as your 5-drop spot, you just put your opponent under a ton of pressure.
It does. It's good in that situation for sure, but I don't know. I'm not that excited. You're way higher on it than I am.
Yeah, it's basically charging Monstrosaur. And
I heard you say that. I was like, okay, well, you're way higher on it than I am in that case.
It's not charging Monstrosaur, but it is definitely better than people value it, including you, apparently. Mm-hmm. And I think it's one of the reasons that you want to care about dino types, even though most of this deck doesn't. Like, this is not the kind of deck that plays Knight of the Stampede all that often. Like, it can. You can end up in that spot, but a lot of the time, you are looking to play 2-drops. Like, you want to go Goblin Trailblazer into Frilled Deathspitter, into like Hunt the Weak or Bombard, and then into the Stampeding Monstrosaur Horncrest, and just get in there, because you can just put a real beating on your opponents that way.
Yeah. Now, one of the really cool and powerful mid-range things that this deck actually has access to are some really super busted uncommons. Forerunner of the Empire, just on its own, is actually quite good to get like any random dinosaur. But also with Needletooth Raptor, it's great. And then you also can go get Raging Regisaur, which can do serious work with the Raptor or with the Forerunner as well.
Combine those and Reckless Rage and the Herd Caller, the Regisaur Beta, you end up with a lot of very premium uncommons. And that's something to look at. Because like, as much as we like white and like all the commons in white, the best white common, Baffling It, uncommon is not as good as the best white common. Mm-hmm. And that's a bad place to be.
That is not great. Yeah.
So even though Red's commons, I think, are not like spectacular, Red has some really good uncommons. So that does kind of key into your evaluation of the whole color.
17 lands?
Yeah, I think most of the time you're at 17. Even if you have like Thunderherd Migration, a slightly bigger curve, you still want to play 17, I think, because like, you're just not going to want to skimp on lands here.
Yeah, as far as creatures go, I've been running, the 14 to 16, kind of the normal amount. But the early drops, at least as far as dinosaurs go, aren't really great. There's not much for you. So you'll usually have to go into pirates or whatever. Don't be afraid to run, your Goblin Trailblazers and the Gilgrove Stalkers. You run those in that deck all day.
It is just looking for good. It's just looking for good curves. They don't have to be dinosaurs, because their dinosaurs are choose, like, can I spot one? And like Stampeding Horncrest just needs one dino to be good. Mm-hmm. So you aren't like Merfolk, you're like, all my creatures are Merfolk. You are, and part of the reason I like this deck is if you have 6 dinos in your deck, you can still be a good dinos deck.
Yeah. Combat tricks, sure. You'll play a couple of those, and then any removal spells that you get. You should be valuing Forerunner of the Empire really, really highly. You should be valuing Shake the Foundations higher than you would in any other deck. Yeah, card's really great. Reckless Rage is particularly good in this deck because you often don't have something with 3 toughness or more.
What's the last one you got here?
I just put it on there for you. Stampeding Horncrest. Just for you, buddy. Look, I mean, this is the classic though, right? This is where you should be valuing it higher than you would normally. So I think it absolutely belongs on that list. Next one. I called this one green, black, I don't know what, because it's just green, black cards, right? Like there is no discernible theme here, right? So
this is one of the decks you're going to draft the most infrequently. I think I've drafted it once so far. Mm-hmm. And, been involved in the drafting of it like 2 more times when I'm like watching someone's draft. Mm-hmm. It's because there's not a real strong reason to be these 2 colors. The colors and the commons and uncommons don't work together all that well. There's not these overarching synergies. There's 2 main reasons to be in these colors. One is that just both colors are open and you're just getting past, Impales and Moments of Craving and good green cards like, Hunt the Weak and good like green uncommons, right? You got your Crested Herd Caller and maybe you wheel 2 Jungle Creepers or something like that. And then you're just like, I'm green and black and my cards are good. And that actually does fly in this format. You can just play a deck with all good cards and, be pretty happy with it.
Yeah. The key though, of course, is that then your deck is really just the sum of its parts. It's just adding up how good the cards are. It is not
more than the sum of your parts. And that is unfortunate because almost all the other decks on the list have these at least, reasonable synergies that make you be like, aha, my Goblin Trailblazer is a little better because I have a Curious Obsession and a Buccaneer's Bravado in my deck or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So basically this archetype is just a pile of cards, right? The strength of those cards is what's going to dictate how good the deck you have is. And the synergies are basically minimal. But it does have some good cards. I mean, you get, Ravenous Chupacabra, you get the really great black removal spells, the Impales and the Moments of Cravings and stuff. It's kind of big creatures with removal. I guess that's close enough. I've been playing 17 lands. I've played this deck twice, and I played 17 lands both times, if I remember correctly. 13 to 17 creatures, not that many combat tricks, and then just basically all the removal you can. Recover, is a card that you want to keep an eye on for it. A card that I love is Dusk Legion Zealot, and then I put Dust Charger because I just honestly couldn't think of anything else.
Bunch of good black cards.
Yeah.
One note I do want to make is that if you get Path of Discovery, the 3 and a green enchantment that says your creatures all explore, then you can pick up Lurking Chupacabra in Ixalan, and that's the 2/3 for 4 that whenever you explore, you get -2/-2.
Ooh,
and that is one of the reasons to be in this color pair is. It's not like you're guaranteed to get a Lurking Chupacabra, but no one at the table ever wants that card.
No.
So just be on the lookout for that synergy if you have Path of Discovery.
Oh, that's interesting. I have not played with Path of Discovery
yet.
But
my guess is the average listener will not ever draft green-black because, the people who do 50 drafts probably end up in it like once or twice. But if you're going to do like a good amount of drafts, if you do 20 drafts of a format, you're in the top percentage of people who like number of drafts. You're probably not a favorite to draft green-black. Right. There's just no real big reason to do that. Sometimes you open Galta Primal Hunger and then pick up 2 Impales and then pick up a Hunt the Weak and then pick up like another green card and then you're just like, okay, I'm green-black. But most of the time, there's just no real reason to be these 2 colors versus almost any other pair. So it's good to know about, but don't worry about it too much.
Now, I'm going to admit this next one, I don't think I've drafted yet, which is green-white mid-range dinosaurs. I'm looking to you for this one because I've played green and white cards together, but they've been in conjunction with blue or more colors.
I've drafted this a couple times. It's basically all on the strength of Ixalan Seer, the uncommon 1 green white 2/3 taps for any color. You can sack it to get back a dino from your graveyard.
The card's good.
The card is great. It's a fantastic card. And what'll happen is if I have a couple white cards and then I just see a 4th or 5th pick Seer, which does happen because people generally don't want to draft green white, you can kind of see if green and white are open and end up like a dino ramp deck. It's one of the main places I like to go when I have Zetalpa, the white Elder Dino, the 8 mana 4/8 flying trample indestructible vigilance, because
Double
Knight of the
Strike.
Stampede and Double Strike, Knight of the Stampede and Ixalan Seer really help Zetalpa. So I've ended up there, and you can often splash red off of Thunderherd Migration, Ixalan Seer, Evolving Wilds for like a Raging Regisaur or Rampaging or Raging Sword Tooth or whatever, and it just plays like a mid-range deck. Like it doesn't try to attack very often. It's not playing Gilt Grove Stalker in its deck. It's playing like Luminous Bonds, Hunt the Weak. The Suncrested Pterodon's great in this deck. It does exactly what the deck wants to do, and gets all your Dino bonuses. Colossal Dreadmaw is a good finisher. Knight of the Stampede, Snubhorn Sentry does what you want. And you end up playing, something like 17 or 18 lands, 14 to 16 creatures, a couple combat tricks. Sometimes I'm not even that high on combat tricks in most builds, so I think that you'll end up with like 0 to 2 combat tricks and then like 2 to 4 removal spells. You just want as many Luminous Bonds and Hunt the Weaks as you can pick up.
Yeah, get their big blockers out of the way and smash them with your dinos. Sure. Okay, so pretty straightforward deck. You said that you liked it or don't like it?
I like it when it's there. Like there's more reasons to be green-white than there are to be like something like black-green. But I don't like it as much as green-red because I think that the aggressive elements of red help the deck more. But if Ixalan Seers are flowing, if your first 2 picks are like Luminous Bond, Suncrested Pterodon, you pick up Squire's Devotion, and then the best card in the pack is a Hunt the Weak, like, yeah, you can be there. I mean, Squire's Devotion is good on Colossal Dreadmaw, so I think you end up you end up in this deck a decent amount of the time, like lower than a lot of the other colors, but not on the bottom 2 or 3 archetypes.
All right. White-red aggro. This is one that I used to find myself falling into during Triple Ixalan all the time. I would just constantly open a burn spell, get a Territory Hammerskull, and I'm like, okay, I guess I'm just white-red. And it ended up being an archetype I was actually pretty fond of in that set. For some reason, in this one, I never find myself accidentally in the white-red deck.
I have drafted this deck a couple times because sometimes the cards are just there for it. But yeah, I think this deck isn't great. I think that aggressive strategies took a hit in this format, and white-red, besides like nominal Dino / light Pirate Vampire synergies, it's just not there. So you're drafting this on card quality, pretty much alone. You're like, if you have the Goblin Trailblazers and Exultant Sky Marchers and Bombards and Luminous Bonds, then yeah, you can combine all those cards and you have a reasonable a chance of beating your opponent down, but you aren't getting there on any kind of synergies, and you also have fewer packs of Territorial Hammerskull, which is one of the big reasons to be a white aggressive deck.
It's something that I'm learning a lot when we see when we went from Ixalan to Rivals. Not a lot changed fundamentally about how they approached the design for the format, right? We didn't even get any new tribes or anything like that. It was all same colors, in the same pairs or triple colors with the same tribe. So, fundamentally it didn't change that much, yet here we have a completely different view on what this format looks like. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, but I find it interesting when we narrow down into these archetypes and start thinking about, well, what am I missing, right? Like you go back to the Merfolk and you're like, well, I'm missing River Herald's Boon. That was one of the most powerful commons, for its deck in its color. And then when you go here, it's what you just said. It's Territory Hammerskull. You said, what are we missing? We're missing, a card that could have easily been an uncommon and still would have been a high pick. Yet it was common. You could get 2 or 3 of them occasionally in a draft. And that sometimes is enough of an incentive to just completely change, the directions that you go. It is really eye-opening to see how those extremely powerful commons change the way that these drafts go.
Yeah. The way this deck ends up breaking down is just like 17 lands almost all the time, sometimes 16, 14 to 16 creatures, a couple combat tricks, and a couple removal spells. Like it's, like a lot of these other decks. One particular note I want to have is Tillinolli's Crown is quite powerful, and you can just combine it with a lot of a lot of cards that like flyers, like just putting it on an Exultant Sky Marcher is also great, or putting it on like Everdawn Champion, the 2/2 that doesn't take combat damage.
Mm-hmm.
That's a nice little combo. You crown up the champion attack, and sure it took a damage from the crown, but it's a 5/1 trample that doesn't take combat damage.
Yeah, that's actually really sweet.
So also sometimes you just pick up 2 Frenzied Raptors, the red-white 3/3 uncommon, because no one else is in this archetype. Like that's one of the reasons that you can end up here is you'll get like a 5th pick Frenzied Raptor, 6th pick Frenzied Raptor, and red and white are just open. Okay. But yeah, I don't draft this deck very often. I don't think it's particularly good, and I don't think there's a particularly strong reason to go into it. Like if I had 2 good white cards and I had the choice between comparable power blue card and comparable power red card, I think that I would take the blue card, which sounds like a meme or whatever, but I think it's just you get more value out of doing that.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
actually
blue and white,
better, yeah.
Yes, combine better than red and white.
Okay, next one is Vampires, white-black Vampires. So this was a deck that I thought was really, really good in Triple Ixalan. I thought it was the best of the mid-range decks and perhaps just the best archetype overall. It didn't have the highest highs, but its ceiling was still quite high and its floor was actually very high as well. So I really favored Vampires in Ixalan, and it has taken a hit. It is not nearly as good as it used to be, but it's also changed a bit. So it's less tribal than it was before. There's fewer cards that care about other vampires. It's not like you have this huge pressure to have all vampires in your deck, but there's still some payoffs for it, and it's still a strong mid-range contender in this format. Some of the commons are Dusk Legion Zealot, a card I love. Legion Conquistador, again, that card I think is just good. Martyr of Dusk is a really nice little 2-drop in a deck like this. You can play Squire's Devotion in these decks. It's quite strong here as well. The Sanguine Glorifier has actually impressed me more than when we first looked at it. It's solid. It's just a fine place to put 4 mana. It's the 3/3 that puts a +1/+1 counter on another vampire when it enters the battlefield.
Oh, the curve of Legion Conquistador or Exultant Sky Marcher into Sanguine Glorifier is just really nice.
Yes, it is. And Sky Marcher is another one I wanted to mention. So you get, interestingly, you get one very, very heavy tribal hitter with Legion Lieutenant, the uncommon, the Lord. But beyond that, the synergies are less pronounced than before. The synergies are more along the lines of cards like Sanguine Glorifier or Voracious Vampire, something like that. They're these sort of one-offs or, little 2-card combos rather than something caring about you having a whole ton of vampires over and over again. Again, I mentioned Legion Conquistador. I think it's just a proven good card now. I think it's just good. You need at least 2 of them. 3 is good. 4 is fine. I don't think I've had 5. I don't know if I'd want 5, but that card, every time somebody casts it, I'm just like, oh, that's really annoying. And every time I play it, I'm like, this is great. And, that's a good thing. And, Sanguine Glorifier, like I mentioned, is pretty good as well. So where are you at on Vamps?
The one nitpick I have here is I would call this white-black vampires, but put the vampires in quotation marks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This is, I actually think, the consensus best deck going into the format in terms of what our team wanted to draft. And I have liked drafting this deck a lot. I enjoy drafting the Sailor Beans deck more, but I think that white-black, quote, vampires, which is really just white-black mid-range, is really strong because it's got the combination of just really good card quality. Like Exultant Sky Marcher is just a good card. Legion Conquistador is now just a good card. Dusk Legion Zealot, all those things. With great commons like Impale and Luminous Bonds and Moment of Craving mean that you can handle almost anything. And then cards like Dusk Charger, which is not a vampire, but it's a 5/5, and it's a great finisher for decks like this. Also, you get access to Squire's Devotion for your Dusk Charger or your flyers. Mark the Vampire does some work here too. And you have the outs to have vampire synergies like Sanguine Glorifier or a Legion Lieutenant, but you don't need them. I just think if white and black are open, it's great to combine them. The cards just naturally work well together. Like, it's not that they have some huge synergy, but high quality cards in both colors with good removal spells and a good curve, like good plays at every hit, right? Martyr of Dusk and Dusk Legion Zealot at 2, Exultant Sky Marcher, Legion Lieutenant. If you need to, Fathom Fleet Border at 3, and then Dusk Charger at 4 alongside Sanguine Glorifier.
Mm-hmm.
You just end up where all your cards are good. Some of them work a little well together, but it doesn't matter because all your cards are good and I think end up playing out very nicely. So I like this deck a lot. I think this is one of the decks you'll draft most frequently because both colors are deep and strong and work well together.
Yeah, I like what you said about there not being really any holes with this strategy. I think that's one of the most, there's nothing to complain about with this. They have answers to everything in removal. They have good threats. They have a solid game plan. They even have good rares, right? You can get Twilight Prophets and stuff like that. It's just, there's really nothing to complain about. To me, this is a quintessential mid-range deck for Limited, and it has all the tools at its disposal. So draft it well, and it will repay you for that. Okay. Red Black Pirates is next. And this is one that I was drafting quite a bit early in the format, and now I only take it if I really think it's open, because it feels like it's getting a little bit cannibalized. It's hard to get all the good stuff. You're not going to get your Bombards, your Impales, and your Moment of Cravings, when everybody's trying to get those no matter what color pair they're in. But this can be a very fast curve out aggro deck with some surprise finishes. Some of the key commons: Goblin Trailblazer, Fathom Fleet Border, Swaggering Corsair is fine, Buccaneers Bravado we've mentioned. Look, this deck can be really fast. You get 3 epically good removal spells, the ones I just named, and you can back them up with efficient threats like Goblin Trailblazer and Fathom Fleet Border. 2/1 Menace for 2 and a 3/3 for 3 when you've got a couple of removal spells in hand can do a heck of a lot of damage, especially on the play. And then you get access to cards like Direfleet Neckbreaker, which is a total bomb in the deck. It just breaks the thing wide open, and you can just snipe victory sometimes with Buccaneers Bravado. This one also has a curve that can start very, very low to the ground if you really want it to. You can play the Scoundrel if you're looking to try to get hyper aggressive, and you can play Fanatical Firebrand at the same clip that Luis and I talked about before, to enable raid and to get those type of things going. And then these usually have a not super high curve. Usually they curve out at 4, maybe have a couple of 5 drops in there, but you can play 16 lands in these quite consistently. Curve is super, super, super important for these. You can play the 1 drops, and you really want to be heavy on 2 drops. And then the combat tricks and the removal spells, just in the most optimal, basically run all your removal and then fill out the rest with combat tricks. This is very much a Cabs style deck. This is a deck that if you look at every card in your deck, you want to look at it and say, this is either a combat trick, a removal spell, or a creature. And if it's not one of those things, it really needs to hold its weight. Something like a Captain's Hook goes amazingly in decks like this. Same thing with, what's it called? The Sword, Pirates, whatever, Cutlass. Stuff like that. Those certainly earn their weight, but cards that like draw you cards or do that kind of thing really, really don't belong in a deck like this. You're not a fan of this one, right?
I don't like this deck very much either. And it's not that I just I don't like playing aggro, so I hate on all the aggro decks. It's that, like in Ixalan, I think the aggro decks are the best decks. I think that in this format, when you curve out, these decks are good, but when you don't, they're a step behind the opposing decks. And I don't see a big reason to play an inconsistent strategy when there are very consistent ones. Like the white-black deck can curve out and be good, right? It can play pretty easily 2-drop Vamp into 3-drop Vamp into Sanguine Glorifier. Mm-hmm. But when it doesn't curve out, when it just doesn't have a 2-drop, but it goes turn 3 Luminous Bonds, next turn play a Dust Charger, next turn play like an Impale, it's still good. Whereas if this Red-Black Pirates deck misses its 2-drop, sometimes you just are drawing random garbage 2-drops or combat tricks in the middle of the game, and your cards just don't do all that much.
Yeah, it reminds me of the blue-red version. They both play out similarly. The same caveat that we mentioned about them playing poor on defense is also true of this deck as well. Lots of 1 toughness creatures.
This deck also just has tons of 3/3s for 3 and 3/2s for 3, which are fine, but it's just it can get bricked by a Sailor of Means or a Gleaming Barrier pretty easily. Like I've played against this deck and had my curve of Gleaming Barrier into Sailor of Means, and they just have like a 1-2-3 curve and can't do anything.
Right. And these are all, again, the upside being that when you do curve out, if your opponent stumbles, if they have a slow deck, if they don't hit a color of mana, or if they mulligan too much, or God forbid they're on the draw, you can absolutely smash them. So you do get some of the upside back, but I tend to agree now with where Luis is at, which is that I don't see a huge incentive to play this unless it's wide open and you're the only one and you get like 2 neck breakers or something, because that card is really great in a deck like this. Then you can do it. Otherwise, you're gaining a little bit by being super aggressive and giving up a lot. We talk about quadrant theory on the show a lot. Looking at cards and saying, well, at what point is it good, bad, or, kind of giving it a grade for when you're developing the game out, when you're stalled out, when you're ahead and when you're behind. And you can do that with decks too, with archetypes. You can say, well, how good is this deck when I'm developing my board? Well, this is the deck you want to be in. How good is it when you're ahead? Well, it's excellent, but we don't put a lot of stock in that. How good is it when you're behind? It's terrible. How good is it when you're at a stalemate, meaning that both players have kind of emptied their hand? It's not that good. You're probably behind. Most of the decks in the format are going to have an edge.
Grasples and Heartless Brutes that just can't block, right? And
yeah, exactly.
These cards just don't do what you want them to do.
Right. So, if it's open, I think it's worth exploring. But overall, yeah, I'm with Luis on this one now. I've kind of come down from my red-black pirate roost, and now I'm playing stupid 0-3s for 1 mana. What do we got? One more to do? Yeah. Yep. One more, and it is blue-black pirate control.
And this deck is not particularly different than the Sailor of Means deck either, because a lot of the important cards are in these colors, and both decks want them. But essentially, when you're blue-black pirates, you're trying to control the game with, Sailor of Means and Prosperous Pirates and Impale and Moment of Craving and Waterknot, and then just finish them with cards like Mark of the Vampire or various bombs or like a Deadeye Brawler, and, pull ahead with Secrets of the Golden City. This is the deck that also really likes Soul of the Currents if it can end up picking up a Mark of the Vampire, because it's just these two colors main. And you end up with a lot of bombs in this deck because black is just the best color for bombs, and you're more likely to want to be like blue-black if you open a Chupacabra because it's just better in this deck. You've got Recover in black, Secrets of the Golden City to make sure you find it in blue. You've got various other ways to draw out the game and make it so your bombs end up doing a lot of work. So I think this deck is fine. I don't think it's meaningfully different than the Sailor of Means deck. Like when it's not like the Sailor deck, it's because you have a couple Kitesail Corsairs and Deadeye Rig Haulers, and you're just slightly more aggressive. Siren Lookout from Ixalan, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that does happen, by the way. It turns out that people like to draft Sailor of Means, and you don't just get them all the time.
Oh, yeah. And sometimes you just end up with cards in two colors here. So I think that you can end up in this deck, even if it looks like it would have been similar to the Sailor of Means deck, regardless of the fact that you're just not splashing, you're just playing a lot of these reasonable cards instead.
Yeah, I usually play 17 or 18 lands in these decks. Usually 17, by the way, rarely 18. 12 to 15 creatures. You still want a decent amount, but you can go down to 11 or 12. I don't prioritize combat tricks at all in these decks. I basically don't play them. I'll play all the removal I can get. I will play 1 to maybe even up to 3 card draw spells if they're the right one. Generally 2 is the right number, but there are some decks that I've had that I wanted even more. And then I'll even play a counter spell sometimes in the main deck, especially if I feel like there's going to be certain types of threats that my deck doesn't answer particularly well. This type of deck can actually do that. And then you mentioned it briefly, but Soul of the Rapids with Mark of the Vampire on it is very, very powerful. It's just the type of thing where you're playing a game of Magic and you're like, okay, I can beat that. I can race. I'm still in this. I can top deck. And then they go put that on there and you're just like, well, I can't interact with it and I can't race it. The game's just over. The 10-point life swing go, and you're just looking down at your hand, and you might be able to flip up your whole library and say, I don't have a single answer for a hexproof flying 4 toughness creature. I just can't do it.
The only problem I have
that's
with
a big
that
finisher.
Is that you can't count on getting Mark of the Vampire because it's a card everyone seems to want, and
yes,
it's in Ixalan, and it's a big set. So yes, it's great when you do get it, and it's one of the reasons to be in this deck. But once you put the pieces together, but you can't really count on it, so don't make a bunch of decisions based on that.
Agreed. And the good news is you can get Soul of the Rapids kind of when you want. It's not a high demand card. It's not even that good of a card, but have one sitting in your board and maybe keep an eye out for the Mark of the Vampire. Speaking of cards you should be valuing higher for this archetype, Mark of the Vampire is certainly one of them. Secrets of the Golden City, Soul of the Rapids. One that I tend to play a lot in here is Dinosaur Hunter, which I recognize is kind of a weird one. But the fact is that you do need 2 drops. And this one's really good against any type of dinosaurs. And it's like shrug otherwise. But often this card can be better than some of the ones that you would think are generally better just because it's a little bit better of a blocker. And you're often playing a more controlling game. Yeah,
I think the card is fine here. Plus it's a pirate and sometimes you play March of the Drowned. So.
There you go. Yep. All right, well, that's it. So our favorite is definitely the 3 to 5 color nonsense deck. What was your second favorite? Like if you sat down right now and I said, look, you're only going to play 2 colors, which 2 would you pick?
White black. I think white black is just very good.
Yeah. I like blue, white, and white black a lot these days.
I think red green is just narrowly after. And
okay.
So, and then the combinations I find to be less desirable are like blue red and red black because I don't like, and white red in third place there because I don't love the aggressive decks. Mm-hmm. And then green black because it's just like a pile of nonsense. Mm-hmm. And white green I think is just mostly a worse version of red green, but sometimes those are the colors that are open and you'll draft them. One key takeaway here is none of these color combinations are off the table. So
yeah, that's a good point.
If you identify the open colors, then you're gonna be in good shape. And the card quality is high in Rivals. How many times have you finished your 2 packs of Rivals and had 18 to 22 playables? Like I imagine it's a lot.
Yes, often. Yes, definitely.
Because if you have identified the open colors, you're just getting 10 cards a pack, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
Which is good because you need 22 playables going into Ixalan to make sure you get up to 23 playables sometimes. So I think that you don't want to end up in a spot where you
playable. You have 1 pack to get a playable.
You need 7 cards from Ixalan.
Yeah, it feels like it. Also, I think we should note here, or at least I wanted to say, I really like this format. Like,
it's a lot of fun. It
saved it, like this isn't an all timer for me, but we went from being in a format that I really didn't like. I mean, I'm sure anybody who listened to the Sunset Show got the idea that, both Luis and I weren't super huge fans of Triple Ixalan by the end of it, but I like this one a lot.
That's an understatement, and it was very obvious.
Yes. but I really like this format, and I'm really glad they fixed it.
Here's where I come down on that. Like, we're going to do the show, even if we don't like the format, but yeah. The more we like the format, the more we're going to draft because I'm not going to sit through Ixalan drafts. Like I still did 30 Ixalan drafts, right? But I'm not going to sit through drafts number 31 through 50 if I don't like it. And I think it would be a disservice to the listeners to pretend otherwise.
Yeah. I agree.
Whereas, I don't know, I've 14 trophies, so I probably have done 28 drafts or something like that.
Oh, come on.
No, I'm somewhere in my 40s, I'm sure, in terms of drafts done, and I still want to do a draft right now.
Yeah,
and that's huge, right? Because how many times a couple weeks into the format are you like, I could go for a draft, and I am at that point right now with Rivals, and I think that's an awesome place to be because I think we've got a couple more good shows of ways to break down this format because this format also is a lot deeper, and that's what we like. We're not just like saying we don't like Ixalan for reasons and not really laying it out. We've laid out why we don't like it, and the depth that Rivals has, I think, is a really big part of it because we're going to see cards fluctuate in value over the course of the format. We are also going to see the value in looking back on Ixalan cards and seeing what changed there too, because I think that's a good topic to touch on in a future show. So absolutely, I'm excited to see what happens as this format continues to develop, and I'm excited to continue drafting it.
Yeah, me too. And one of the really cool things I like is that I drafted different decks at the early part of the format than I do now, and I've experienced success at each of those. So I've been able to follow the draft metagame as it's gone, and to me, that's one of the most fun parts of Limited. Okay, that is going to do it for the show this week. I want to remind you that the podcast is brought to you by channelfireball.com. That's the place to go for all things Magic related on the internet. I mentioned selling your cards back to them. That is something you should definitely consider. Take a look at that pile of rares and send it back in. You don't need it. And they're going to give you 30% bonus on those things as well. And while you're there, you can access awesome free content. That's right. No paywall. You just go right to the front page of Channel Fireball and boom, you're going to get articles from some of the best players in the world. And you can even watch videos and podcasts like this one all for free right on the front page. Make sure you check that out as well if you're looking to get better at Magic. And I know you are because otherwise you wouldn't be here. That will do it though. For this week, we'll be back next week with regularly scheduled programming. We'll see you then. Okay, Luis, you ready for a little LSV, little Scott-Vargas?
No, I do wonder if you need to dial in Luis Salvato, the winner of Pro Tour Bilbao. He is very clearly now the real LSV. So
he really is. He really is. All right, so I've got 2 packs for you, but they're small. These are actually 8 card packs from the past, and this first one comes from Matt R. from Davis. I think he said he knows you, maybe.
Matt R.
Yeah, from where you went to school, that Davis.
No, I know what Davis is. I'm trying to think.
Anyway, he gave me this pack of Renacimiento. No.
Italian
whatever.
Renaissance.
Italian Renaissance. So let's get into this. So what is in this? What can this be?
It's a reprint set of all old cards, minus like the cards that are in, I think, whatever the reserve list was at the time. And I think sets like this are why they even had the reserve list.
Okay, this is a good one. I'm going to read these in Italian, and you're going to have to get them. There's 8. How many do you think you're going to get?
3?
Yeah, I think I'm going to actually give you the over. I just took a quick look. All right, here's the first one. It's called Sinbad.
So this is Sinbad.
Yep.
It's 1 in a blue for a 1/1, and you tap, draw your top card if it's a land, otherwise discard it.
This is really fun. I actually have no idea. It's literally in Italian. So I totally believe you, though, and you're going to have to grade yourself on these because I don't even know what they do. This next one is called Aladino.
Aladdin. This one.
You're right.
It's like 1 red, 1/1. You can pay 2 red to steal an artifact. Just like Aladdin. He steals a lamp. It's like a dude with a little green stealing a lamp.
He is. I'm giving you this one. He's actually 2 red, and it's 1 red to activate, but whatever.
Oh, I switched those two, sure.
Yeah, I'm not going to punish you for conflating those. You might get this one, although I'm looking at the artwork, so it's kind of like cheating. This one is called Catapulta let's see, Metraglia. Yeah.
This looks like
it's got a goblin holding a bat.
Yeah, this is a 4 mana 2/3. It taps to deal 1 damage to a flying creature.
Yes, wow, you've already hit 3. You're gonna get I think you'll get this one too. This one's called Amuleto de Krug.
Amulet of Krug.
This is so funny. They're all just like super direct translations. Yes, it is Amulet of Krug. Do you remember what it does?
I don't remember what Amulet of Krug does. I'm just gonna whip completely.
It's 2 mana artifact, 2 tap. It looks like it says prevent 1 damage to a creature.
To a creature or player, yeah. Or maybe just creature, I don't know.
This one has a somewhat iconic artwork. It's called Fanciula Alata.
Describe the artwork and maybe I'll get there.
It's a lady flying. She has wings and she has a huge smile.
Oh, this is
Caja Folio.
Yeah, I know. This is Bird Maiden. She's 3 in a red, 2 in a red, for a 1/2 flyer.
Yeah, volare. Yeah. Wow, good job. This one, if I get this is insane. This one's called Espida de Nafs.
Nafs Asp.
Yes.
Green for a 1/1, and when it hits your opponent, they have to pay 2 or it does an additional damage to them.
I think it's 1, but you're absolutely getting credit. You somehow are 6 for 6 right now? That's insane.
Well, not the Amulet of Krug. I didn't get that one.
Why? Oh, because you didn't know what it did. I just got so excited that you knew the name. All right, you're 5 and 1. Next one.
Look, all I'm saying is I'm just waiting for the tournament of this. Like, I think we need to get another guest who can go toe to toe. Because Owen beat me. I need redemption. So
yeah, all right, we will. Because the thing is that people do not understand how good you are at this until you have them do it. And then they freeze up because it's just words. Without the picture, it's incredibly difficult. And admittedly, Owen is a unicorn when it comes to this stuff too, but this is extremely difficult. Although these Italian ones have been really easy. This next one is too. It's called Miniera de Urza.
Oh, is this Urza's Mitre? No, that wasn't in the set. Is this Urza's Chalice? Is it like a cup?
Nope.
Oh.
Miniera.
I don't know what a Miniera is. What is the picture?
M-I-N.
Oh, Urza's Mine?
There you go.
I see. Sure.
All right, this next one is Testugina Gigante.
Well, it's something big, but I don't know what that means.
It's giant, actually.
Yes.
It's a giant tortoise.
Oh, this is a 1 and a blue for a 1/1 that has +0/+3 when it's untapped.
Yeah, although it has this weird writing in it where it says Fintanto che rimane, and then it says Stapata, and it's STAP all caps. I think that they had some weird printing. Yeah. Okay, you crushed that one. My God. Next one is an easy mode. It's in English.
Ooh, all right.
And this one, actually, I got to mention, this one came from our friend David Fitzsimmons, who actually gave us a pack of this set, which I'm going to tell you, it's the dark. He also gave us a 5th edition, a Scourge, a Judgment, and a Prophecy. So thank you so much, David. We will eventually get through these. All right, first one. Wait, do I tell you the name of it? Yeah, Living Armor.
Living Armor.
I'm just putting all of these in the giveaway, by the way, because I don't know.
A dark pack could have something good. You open a Preacher, a Ball Lighting, or a Maze Abyss. I don't remember what Living Armor does.
All right, it is. I think it's like the first stab at an equipment, maybe. I don't know. It's 4 artifact, tap it, sacrifice it to put +O+X counter on target creature where X is target creature's casting cost. No, it's just terrible. Fire and Brimstone. God, that's a name I bet you wish they could get back, huh?
Yeah. I think this is 3 white, deals 4 damage to your opponent if they attack you this turn or something like that.
Yep. Oh, it actually also does 4 to you.
Oh.
Wow, that's a bad one. But yes, you're getting credit for that. Waterworm?
What was it?
Waterworm? You'd recognize the
Waterworm.
artwork.
Blue for a 1/1 that has +0/+1 while you have an island, I think?
Yeah, it's when if the opponent controls an island, but you're getting credit. Murk Dwellers.
This card I thought was really sweet. It was one of the original combos was with Dwarven Warriors to make it unblockable. It's a 4 mana, 3 to black for a 2/2. When it attacks, it gets +2/+0.
Yeah, if not blocked.
If not blocked. And you had Dwarven Warrior, which gives a creature with 2 power plus unblockable. And so this is really a 4 power creature, but you can make it unblockable.
Wow, 4 power creature for 4 mana. Imagine that. Next one, Squire.
This is the original. This is 1 and a white for a 1/2. See, Squire is one of those cards that in Magic you often are. It gets referred to a lot. Just like Bolt is a 1 mana deal 3.
Yep.
You know, Squire is one of those cards that everyone knows what it does, and I think that it ends up being pretty iconic, even though the card itself is terrible.
Yeah, I mean, maybe is it just the first 2 mana 1/2? Is that? Cause, you know, we talked on the Alpha show about. Like Hill Giant, you know, that's obviously the first, 3 in a red, 3/3, etc. I'm assuming that Squire's the first of that, hence the name.
Yeah, it's just that first, 2 mana 1/2. Then, as a result, it's iconic. It's a little worse than Stoneforge Mystic, but you never know.
Yeah, slightly worse. Next is Ghost Ship.
Ooh, this card is sweet too. It's 2 blue for a 2/4 flyer, and you can pay blue to regenerate it.
That's right.
Blue Regenerators is a little sketchy, but
not have the color pie sorted out. This next one's called Morale.
This is 1 white. Give other creatures +1/+1 this turn.
Mm-hmm.
And against it.
Oh, it's actually attacking creatures.
Oh, attacking creatures. Okay.
What is the artwork a picture of?
Some dude holding a flag, I think.
Yeah, you're totally right. Man, you're good at this. Goblins. What am I going to say?
It's goblins plural?
Yeah, goblins.
Of the Flarg.
Yes! I don't even have to say the whole name now.
This card is... Okay, here's another history lesson. I'm still in alpha podcast mode. This is a 1 mana 1/1 Mountain Walk. Mm-hmm. But if you control any dwarves, sacrifice goblins of the Flarg.
Yeah. In the old parlance, it's buried.
Yes.
If controller... So they don't get along with dwarves?
Yes, and it's so funny because the original Sly deck, the original Curve Out Red aggro deck, played Goblins of the Flarg and dwarves in the same deck. That's how bad the card selection was.
Oh, that's insane. You just lived with the downside? Holy crap. I did not know that. That's insane. By the way, you crushed that one too. I mean, you had a couple of minor... things, but you were 7-1.
Only minor if you're grading on the scale of me getting Path of Metal wrong because it doesn't deal damage to all opponents. Come on.
What about the legendary part? That was pretty major.
Yeah, if you flip two of them.
All right, you know what, Luis? I think you're ready to go back in the ring. We're going to find a worthy contestant. Maybe we'll bring Owen back on or a new contender because I don't know. You kind of smashed that one. I think you're ready to go and dust off the gloves and get back in the ring one last time.
Oh yeah.